Hello all, I'm Sai and in today's video I'm bringing to you my November reading wrap-up. November was an amazing reading month for me and I managed reading a total of 15 books, of which 12 are physical books and 3 are audiobooks. It's been so long since I read more than 10 physical books in one reading month itself. So just for that reason, November was amazing for me. Even though there is not even one complete 5-star of all the 15 books that I've read, I pretty much enjoyed each and every one of the books that I read throughout the month. And I also managed finishing my book bingo for 2024 in November. I think that video was published just before this one, so you can have a look at it if you're interested. So without any further ado, let's get into the books right away. Starting with the physical books as usual, the first book which I finished reading in November is The One You Cannot Have by Preeti Shenoy, which is an Indian literary fiction book. More than literary fiction, I can say that it's a combination of both literary fiction as well as romance. Now in this book, we follow our three main characters, Aman, Shruti and Anjali. Of these three, Aman and Shruti were in love during their college days, but for some reason Shruti ended up breaking up with Aman and she ended up getting married to another guy named Rishabh. During this time, there is also this third person named Anjali who has been very fond of Aman for quite a long time ago. It's been years since all this has happened and Aman has settled in UK for his job right now. He's coming back to India and when he's here, he has to deal with his feelings towards Shruti even though she is married, and he also gets to realize the love that Anjali has for him. Who will end up with whom and what are the reasons for people breaking up their romantic relationships, even though it sounds very true and honest in the beginning, is the plot of this book. All three main characters whom we follow here are written really well. There's also one or two plot elements which just felt totally unnecessary if you ask me. If they had been removed, the book could have been much more strongly plotted according to me. So I ended up rating this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next one is an adult contemporary romance, but it can be read by even teenagers too because it is quite a cozy book, and it is The Village Green Bookshop by Rachel Lucas, in which we follow our main character Hannah, who's a married woman and she has a teenage son and a workaholic husband. Because of some reasons in the beginning of the book, what happens is Hannah, who's living in London along with her family, gets a chance to inherit this bookshop that is attached to a small post office in a very small village from one of her cousins. And she decides to move to that small village along with her family after she inherits this bookshop. Now, this village is very, very conservative and everything that goes on there is often criticized by the opinions of all the people who live in the village. While Hannah moves into the village and tries to make the bookshop her own and start certain new things there, she also ends up earning a lot of opposition from the people inside the village. During this time, a romance also starts budding out in Hannah's life, and whether this is right or wrong, and everything that she is doing in the village for the betterment of the village as well as to find some purpose in her life is the plot of this book. Now, from the title of the book, I expected this one to be more of a bookish book, but it was more of a romance or contemporary book, and it had very few bookish elements if you ask me. Since my expectations for this book were quite different and it ended up delivering something very much out of what I expected from it, I ended up rating this one also 4 out of 5 stars. The next few books in continuation will be some books which I picked up for Nonfiction November, of which the first one is a short book because I wanted to start off Nonfiction November with something which is quite light and easy to read. So I went with this book, which is Badass Affirmations by Becca Anderson. Now, this book is a collection of stories of very strong women who have been known for their personality, skill and hard work over generations across different parts from the world. But it felt more like a Western-centered idea of how a woman can show their power and, just become the person whom they are for themselves as well as making the world better. It felt like the author just included 1 or 2 people of color inside the book or 1 or 2 people who are not from the USA inside this book in order to make it even more inclusive. At the same time, there are hardly few people inside this book whose stories are not already well known to the mass population out there. I felt like that while I was reading this book, and even some life stories are explained in detail compared to the others by considering them as badass to the bone. I'm able to understand why the author selected certain people alone to be illustrated properly with a bit more detail from their life story inside this book. But it felt like of all the people whom she chose to be badass to the bone, more than half the people are too popular and they are already well known to almost each and every person across the world. If the author had chosen a bit lesser known women and made them known to much more people in the world, I think this book could have been something else. It also has a lot of affirmations which I enjoyed reading, but as a whole this was a very basic book for me, and if you are a total beginner to reading self-help books or non-fiction books, you can go forward and try this one. Or if you want to learn the power of affirmations, even then you can go forward and read this book. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything special about it or anything that makes the book stand out from all the things that I read for the rest of the month. So I ended up rating this one 3 out of 5 stars. The next one is a follow-up or companion to another self-help book which I think I read 2 or 3 years back, and that book was something totally different from anything that I've read before, and it is also something that's got to do with a not so well-known kind of psychology that is used across the world. And this book is a follow-up for that one, which is The Courage to Be Happy by Ichiro Kimishi and Fumitake Koga. Now, The Courage to Be Disliked, which is the first book written by these two authors together before this one, was something so fresh and outstanding for me. This one also ended up being the same, but it felt like both of these books were kind of opposite to each other. You cannot compare this one to that and, expect both of them to go well together just because they are part of the same series or they are like companions to each other. They both tackle two different concepts of people pleasing and having the courage to be happy in totally different spheres. The book is actually written in the form of a dialogue between a student and a philosopher. So in the first book, what happens is the student has a conversation with the philosopher. He learns a lot of things from the philosopher and goes and practices them in his life for 2 to 3 years. It actually makes his life worse there, so he's totally pissed off with the philosopher and comes back to meet him again, and he takes this whole night along with the philosopher again to understand what all he did wrong and in order to prove that everything that the philosopher is saying is actually factually wrong and cannot practically work in the world. After reading this book, you'll be quite uncertain of what you have to do, what you shouldn't do, and what should be your approach towards life. It is quite a polarizing book and also, a confronting book if you ask me. So you need to take this book slow and read it at your pace slowly in order to get all the benefit out of it. I quite enjoyed reading it and I rated this also 4 out of 5 stars. Next we have another self-help book and it is Ageless Body, Timeless Mind by Deepak Chopra. I think I have read like 2 or 3 other Deepak Chopra's books before this one. But of all the books, this felt like the most repetitive for me, and I was also able to understand the importance of why he is repeatedly emphasizing a lot of things throughout the book. The basic idea of the book is that we human beings are designed in a way that we can withstand all the pressure that we are put through, and there is not that much that a human being cannot tackle or handle in life. But despite doing all those things, all of us in the current world tend to be aging a bit faster than the people before our generations did. And the author goes on explaining why all this is happening at such a rapid pace and why do most of us feel like we are aging at a much higher speed than our ancestors or just people 2 or 3 generations before us. It has a lot of things considered, okay? It's not just about the physical health and mental health of a being alone. It also deals with the food that we eat, the environment that we are in, the kind of mindset that we have towards life, the communities that we are a part of, whether we are a part of a community or not, a lot of case studies that are involved with people who have lived longer lives very, very normally as a community itself. It's not just very peculiar to certain people alone inside the community, but the community as a whole itself seems to be thriving with the matter of age when it comes to a concern. There are people who have lived like 160, 170 years normally in certain populations, and the reasons behind them are actually excavated inside this book. It is quite an intense read. It will take a lot of time to go forward and read this book. I listened to the audiobook of this one and that was kind of an abridged version, so I was able to finish this book a lot easier than I thought I would. But trust me, if you're going to read this book, you need to give yourself the time. You need to be in that right mental space because it is a treasure trove. Okay, I think I will be reading this book at least a few more times in the future because there's so much that I have not grasped from this book from my first read alone. So yeah, I ended up rating this one also 4 out of 5 stars. Next we have an Indian mythological fiction book and it is Krishna Mahavishnu Avatar by Kevin Missal, and this is the first book in a duology or trilogy for Krishna that the author has written. Now, the premise of this book is very, very interesting and it actually happens after the end of the Mahabharata. It's actually kind of during the end of the Mahabharata if you ask me, because the Kurukshetra war has gotten over. Who has to win has won, who has to lose has lost, and one of the most important players inside the war, who's Lord Krishna, is the main character here. And the story of his kingdom and the story of his family after the victory of the war is actually shown to us here. In the beginning of the book itself, it is shown to us that 5 years back, Krishna just left his kingdom and went somewhere and no one knows where he is. There are only 2 sons that he has, and of the 2, one is actually the ruling king right now and the other has been cursed by Krishna to be diseased by leprosy. Why all these things happen and why are they actually looking for Krishna right now compared to these past 5 years is all dealt with properly in this book. Just like in any of the other Kevin Missal books, the mythological fiction aspect of this is definitely top notch. Okay, I have not seen anyone write mythological fiction. Okay, not fiction much better than Kevin Missal so far from all the books that I've read from Indian mythological fiction. There's also a catch in this book which I'll not reveal because only when you get to know about all the details as you read the book, you'll be able to see how many layers are there for this one. And I think it's also an adult book, so if you're under 18, please don't read it. Otherwise, you can definitely go forward and try it. I'm super excited to read the next book inside the series and I want it to be released as soon as possible. But I don't think it will be released anytime soon. We'll have to wait and see. This itself released in December of 2023 and I ended up reading it in November 2024 only. And this is a limited signed edition, so that is the sign of the author here. So yeah, to conclude, this was definitely a solid book and it felt like a good opening for a series. And I rated this one also 4 out of 5 stars. Next, we have another non-fiction book and this is actually a medical memoir and it is quite a very sad, hard, dark and important book if you ask me. And it is The First Cell by Azra Raza, in which the author talks about why cancer is very difficult to cure once it starts developing and spreading to different parts of a person's body, and why it often relapses to a lot of people and ends up taking the toll of their life no matter how hard they fight the disease. The main thing that the author tries to make us understand inside this book is that there are treatments available for cancer, but there are so many more complications related with treating a person that has cancer compared to diagnosing it even further and earlier in life. And one takeaway that I got very, very importantly from the book is that if cancer is diagnosed at a much earlier stage, it can be far more efficiently cured, treated and managed by the doctors compared to how it is treated and dealt with after it progresses on in stages. And she also tells us how cancer just doesn't happen like this to anyone. It has its own life cycle, it has its own pattern. The difficulty is that it happens in so many different ways for so many different people because of so many reasons that it is very, very difficult to put a finger and say that this is the reason why a person has cancer. She talks about a lot of people who are her own patients and some patients that she has known because of her work, and how they all, despite living very full, happy and serving lives, have lost the battle against cancer and ended up dying, including her own husband. So we have to keep that in mind. This has like almost every trigger that you can think of when it comes to cancer, and especially the trauma that accompanies the person who's undergoing treatment as well as the people who are surrounding them as a whole. I should say that this was quite a difficult book for me to read. I had to make my heart so cold and hard that at some instances I wanted to disconnect from the book because I was not able to deal with what was happening in there, because all these have happened to real life people in the flesh and they have been through all that stuff despite trying so hard, despite giving all that they had, both the patients as well as the doctors. So yeah, if you're going to read this book, please do keep in mind that you need to go in well prepared. You need to be in a good mental state to receive what the author is saying without getting intimidated or frightened by it. So yeah, this was an amazing book and I'm so glad that the author went forward and wrote this, and I can't even imagine how difficult it must have been for the author to write this one. So yeah, this was easily a 4.75 star read for me because I can't think of rating this book anything lesser than that. I'm also taking away that 0.25 stars just because of the impact that it had on me, and I just felt so negative and sad after reading the book, and I thought that it would give me some hope against the disease because I've seen people have it in my life and I know how hard and difficult it can be from seeing it in front of my eyes. So yeah, definitely a great read, but you need to be prepared if you're going to read this book. Next, we have a cozy adult mystery book, and it is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. After reading The First Cell, this was a book which I needed to read because it was very relaxing, it was very calming, and it just felt so cozy for me, despite it being a murder mystery, okay? Here we follow a cast of 4 senior people who are over 60-70 years in age in England, and they are living in this old age home. They have this thing called the Thursday Murder Club, during which each and every week on Thursday they meet up together and start discussing cold cases which have not been solved by the policemen for some reason, okay? And during this time itself, what happens is one of the people inside the compound of the old age house and a person that all these 4 people from the Thursday Murder Club know ends up being murdered, and they try to investigate the case and find out who the murderer is. This was so cheeky, it was so funny. It had that very peculiar kind of humor that British people have, and I was able to see that almost in each and every chapter. It was so much fun to read, also quite easy to read, okay? In the beginning, like 70 to 80 pages, I was a bit confused because I was not able to understand who the police is, who are the people that are actually taking care of these people inside the house, and who are the 4 main characters. But after that, it became quite clear for me and I was able to follow on with the story much easily from then. I think there are like 3 more books inside the series after this one, so I'll probably continue on with the series, and this will be perfect for us to read during this winter season here in India. So just go forward and give it a read. I rated this one also 4 out of 5 stars. Next, we have quite a surprising book for me because this was not in my plan to be read in November, but I was not able to believe with the amount of speed in which I was reading this book, because I think I read the first 100 or 200 pages in 2 to 3 days because it was quite difficult to get into. But after that, I was just flying through the book. I also listened to the dramatized audiobook version of this one from Storytel, and it is House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book inside the Crescent City series by J Maas. Here we follow our main character Bryce inside this world or this planet, which is totally different from our own, but it has a lot of technology. There is magic there. There are different races of magical beings who are living there. And our main character Bryce is working in a small antique shop. And she has a good life going on with her friend Danica, who's her best friend. In the beginning of the book, what happens is someone ends up killing Danica. And from then on, Bryce decides to find who killed Danica. And during this time, there is this fallen angel who's actually assigned to the case of Danica's death, and his name is Hunt. Just like in any of the other J Maas books, Bryce and Hunt start investigating the case together and they fall for each other. The romance in this one was really good, and I can say that compared to the first 3 quarters of the book, the 4th quarter was so brilliant. Okay, I was not able to understand how I was able to read the last chunk of the book so fast because it has so much plot going on. It is also a typical J Maas book. Everything that she does in her other series and other books is also present here. So if you want to experience something different, I'd say don't go for it. But if you do like her kind of fantasy, which is very easy to read, but also quite deep and has nice representation of mental health and other such stuff, you can go forward and try to read this one, because I think it has been handled in a much better and, detailed way in this one compared to her previous series. I'm not saying that it was not well done there. I'm just saying that it is done much better than it was done there in this book. Having said that, the first 200 pages or so of the book was difficult for me to get through because there is way too much world building going on, because it's an 800-page book, okay, and there are 3 books inside the series so far, and each and every one of them is at least 800 pages long. So once you get past those 200 pages, I can easily say that you'll be able to fly through the book easily, because J Maas's writing is very addictive and it is so easy to read despite the story being good. So yeah, I had so much fun reading this book and I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. So I ended up rating this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next we have another self-help book, and this was a chunker, okay. It took so much time for me to read this book, and it is also a treasure trove of knowledge. Again, this is actually an expanded version of the original narration from the book, and it is Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert D. Cialdini. I've been meaning to read this book ever since the beginning of 2023. I think this edition is just over 400 pages long or so, but the text inside the book is tiny. Yeah, it might seem like the margins are a bit big, but the text is so tiny that there's so much content inside this book, and everything is explained in a way that it is easy to understand. That's what makes this book better, if you ask me. The author talks about his experience of trying to understand the power of influence over other people and how it can be properly done. Okay, everything needs to be convinced for people psychologically before it is actually made in a physical or financial level. So, in very simple or, not so correct terms, I can say that this book teaches you how to deal with people and play mental games very properly so that you can end up benefiting from it while not making the person on the other end lose anything. And it also helps you understand when you are being played by people. It was such an amazing book for me to read, and each and every chapter has kind of a summary at the end. So, even if you feel like you did not understand something, you can go back and read it from the summary so that it's much easier for you to understand without, spending a lot more time on rereading the chapter all over again. So if you are expecting to read a nice psychology book, definitely go forward and try this one. It is great for business people. It is great for business owners, entrepreneurs, teachers, especially corporate employees, and anyone out there. Just go forward and try giving this a read. I'm sure that your mind will be blown. I rated this one also 4.75 out of 5 stars. The next one is another non-fiction book, and it was my book club pick for the month of November, and it is The Travel Gods Must Be Crazy by Sudha Mahalingam. Now, in this book, the author basically talks about her experience from visiting different countries from around the world. And the author has written this book in her 60s, which is definitely inspiring if you ask me. She talks about so many experiences that she's had over the years. Many of the countries that she's visited is because of her job, because she's been in a very high-ranking position in a government job in our country. And that has provided her the chance to go to different countries and experience their cultures and the things going on there, even though the trips were for the purpose of business and not just leisure. It was such a fun book to read. There are so many funny instances that the author narrates, and she has that very peculiar kind of humor that elderly people have. Having said that, there are also certain cons with this book that I did not like the tone of the book at most instances, because despite going to so many different countries and getting to experience so many things, which in itself is a privilege, whether it's given to you just like that or if you earned it, the author felt like she was complaining and whining for most instances, which just made me feel so infuriated with her writing. Another problem that I had with this book is that it felt more like a textbook rather than just a non-fiction book or a travelogue. So many words that you cannot understand. At least one word per page is there in such a way that you want to go to the dictionary or online to look up its meaning. I did it a couple of times, but after that I just got fed up and went with the flow. What I got from the context of reading the sentence, I just took it as such. It wasn't one of the best books that I've read, but it was quite a fun book, so I ended up rating this one also 3 out of 5 stars. The last physical book which I finished reading in November is again the second book from the Crescent City series, and it is House of Sky and Breath. I was not able to believe that I read the first book in the series itself in November, but in the last week of the month, I just had this urge to go forward and start the second book, and why was I not disappointed? I can say that this book was just as good as the first book, but until you get to the last few pages, okay, literally the last few pages of the book, it does not stand as tall as the first book inside the series. I was feeling like, okay, it is a good book, but it is not so good that it makes me feel like how I felt during I read the first book from the series, and it gave kind of a Middlebrook syndrome for me. But once I got to the end, I was totally dumbstruck. I did not expect J Maas to do a thing that she does towards the ending of the book, because she does something. Okay, I'm not going to reveal what it is because it will spoil not just this book but also some other books for you. I can't wait to read the third book inside the series. I don't have it on my shelf, and I don't think I'll be buying it for like at least a few more days, because the hardcover of that one is very expensive. I think it's over 2000 rupees, but I want the hardcover only because I want it to match with the editions that I have. So I'll be buying it a little bit later, but for sure. There are some new characters here. The world expands like extensively, but as a whole, this was a fun book to read, and I ended up rating this one also almost 4 stars towards the end. But after I finished reading the book, and with the shit that got dropped during the end of the book, I can easily say this is a 4.5 star book for me. Now moving on to the audiobooks. The first audiobook which I finished listening to is quite a popular book right now, and it is The Lantern of Lost Memories by Sanaka Hiiragi, which is a Japanese fiction book that is translated into English. It is a magical realism book in which there is this space between life and death, so that people who end up dying go to this place where a collection of memories from their lives, which are very specific and close to their heart as significant ones, are taken as photographs and run as a slideshow or kind of a film to them after they pass on to the other side. It is quite a cozy and nice book to read. It also has that really nice flavor of sadness that is woven throughout the story, because each and every character whom we focus as the main one here has died. Okay, that's why they are inside this place between life and death. We literally get to look back at the lives of these people and what all they want to take up as memories and actually revisit after their death. It is a little bit sad, but also very, very cozy in its tone. Again, a great book that is suitable for the winter time. It gave me the same kind of vibes that Before the Coffee Gets Cold did. It also feels like a collection of short stories. Not just one story is extensively told throughout the book. There are like 2 to 3 people who come into the story, and each and every one of their lives is shown to us while they look back into their lives and select the instances from them. So yeah, it was a nice book, and I rated this one also 4 out of 5 stars. Next, we have a YA book written in verse, and it is Blood Moon by Lucy Cuthew. This is a YA contemporary in which we follow our main character who's a teenager, and I think she's in the last few years of her high school, and what happens is during one of the romantic or sexual experiences that she has, she ends up menstruating. Someone has actually videographed the fact that she has bled right then and makes that into a huge kind of deal, even though it is just blood. How it causes a lot of problems for her both in real life as well as online, and how she tackles all of it with the help of her friends as well as the adults in her life is the plot of this book. I can say that it is not very easy to read. It does tackle a lot of serious topics in a very sensible way. So in that aspect, if you ask me, it is a little bit difficult and a little bit, emotionally taxing to read. But as a whole, I think this is a book which is very much necessary to be read by teenagers, especially when they are like, 16, 17 years old, or at least 15 and above in age. Definitely a good book, and I'd suggest many more people who like YA to go forward and read this one. I rated this one also 4 out of 5 stars. The last book and last audio book from the November wrap-up is Walk on the Water by Neville Goddard, in which the author talks about manifestation using his own understanding of God and the Bible, to be very specific. And I can say that each and every one of the books that I've read by Neville Goddard so far have been very different in their exploration of the topic of manifestation and how it correlates with the subconscious mind and what all we have to do in our lives and just let loose and let go in a detached way to get what we want in life. This was just a very similar book like any of the others that I've read from him before this one. It is hardly like 20 or 30 minutes long as an audiobook, and I think I finished listening to this on my birthday. So yeah, it gave me a bit more dimension to see how we can manifest the things that we want in our lives by concentrating less on them. So yeah, I ended up rating this one also 4 out of 5 stars. So yes guys, those are all the 15 books which I managed reading in November, and it was an exclusively great reading month for me. And for December, I'll be reading new books only for the first 10 to 15 days of the month, within which I'll also finish reading my book club pick, which is Yes or No by Dr. Spencer Johnson. After that, for the rest of the month, I will be either reading the books that I've read already in the past years or this year, which I feel like rereading, or even if I read new books, I'll be counting them into my reading for 2025. So hardly just 2 more weeks of reading left for 2024 for me to wrap up. And then I will go forward and make my worst books, best books, disappointing books, surprising books, and all such lists. I hope you got some good recommendations from this video. And don't forget to leave your November wrap up in the comments because I'd like to know what you read and get some recommendations from you guys. If you did enjoy watching today's video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.